Now think about that for a second. Being anti-lockdown is enough to have you on a list of far-right extremists. Wednesday on the podcast, we talked about a study that was done by a Seattle-based nonprofit that labeled more than 800 Republicans in the United States, Republican state lawmakers, as having ties to far-right groups and far-right extremism. Pretty shocking study, right? Of course, some media outlets picked it up and talked about it. And my issue I took with it on the show on Wednesday was that several clearly moderate Republicans in Washington state somehow wound up on this list of far-right extremist Republicans. And so any rationally thinking person and any rationally thinking member of the press would wonder, okay, what could their criteria be that would land some of these lawmakers on a list that ties them to far-right groups? I have raised issue with this list on social media, and I reached out. Let's first just talk about the organization. So this is the homepage. When you go to the homepage of the IREHR, again, Seattle-based, so it's got the Black Lives Matter logo right there on the homepage. And it says, "We are the Institute for Research and Education on Human Rights. We fight white nationalism." Okay, so this is their stated mission, all right? Not going to think too much of it, like we should all fight white nationalism. That's great, right? So the name of their special report was called Breaching the Mainstream, a national survey of far-right membership in state legislatures. And this thing was in depth. I mean, clearly they put a lot of work into this, but I'm going to take issue with the level of work that they indeed did. So you've got all these different chapters that lay out the introduction, the legislators on the list, profiles some of them in depth. And one of the things that becomes clear is this group, the IREHR, used membership in Facebook groups as a way to determine who they were going to put on this list of far-right lawmakers or lawmakers with ties to the far right. And so, of course, I was wondering, okay, well, what Facebook groups might qualify someone as being right-wing? And if you go into the database where this is all listed, it shows you the Facebook group that the lawmaker belonged to, or groups in some instances, that landed them on this list of far-right lawmakers. And what you'll notice is a lot of those groups are tied to COVID mandates. Reopen Washington State. This is the name of a Facebook group that landed this particular lawmaker on this list. Reopen Washington State. The organization labeled this a COVID denial group and said it was anti-lockdown. Now think about that for a second. Being anti-lockdown is enough to have you on a list of far-right extremists. Let's keep going. Reopen the Yakima Valley. That is a group that landed this lawmaker, membership to this group, on a list of lawmakers with ties to far-right extremism. Again, if you keep going down this list, reopen Washington State. Reopen the Yakima Valley. I'm just singling informed parents of Washington. Open Spokane schools. Washington Parents' Rights in Education. Save Our Freedom Washington. Reopen Washington State. Reopen Spokane. Open Spokane schools. And so I got myself thinking, is simple membership in groups like that really enough for this organization to deem these lawmakers fringe, right-wing? I thought there's got to be more to it than that. Because if I saw a group, I was anti-lockdown, so if I saw a group called Reopen Washington State on Facebook, that's a group I might join. Now, like many Facebook groups I'm part of, I might never look at it again, but maybe I'd join it. Maybe I'd look at it occasionally. So if you had a group like that people were in posting fringe things or conspiracy theories about COVID, it's possible that a member of that group wouldn't even see those things. Now, there was at least one example of a Facebook group as part of this report that I thought, yeah, just the name of the group itself, by joining that, I can understand how that would land you on a list of far-right lawmakers. That particular group was called 2020 Plandemic, Corona Psyop Mind Control, Anti-New World Order Vaccines 5G. Yeah, I think if you're a lawmaker and you hit to join a group that's labeled that, that's a problem, right? The name itself, joining that group, is a problem. But for groups like Unmask Washington, Unmask Our Kids Washington, Vaccine Choice for Washington State, Reopen Washington State Churches, Reopen Washington Action Network, Reopen the Yakima Valley, Reopen Spokane County, Reopen Clallam County. For you to suggest that being anti-lockdown is somehow COVID denial, conspiracist, and makes you far right, I thought, no way. This organization labeled people based on something so shallow. So I reached out to this organization and I let them know, hey, I'm very critical of this report. Do you want to come on the podcast and talk about it? And this is a response I got. Dear Brandi, Kruse, thanks for reaching out and for the invitation. We wish your request had come in earlier, as all of our staff have prior obligations tomorrow. I would add that we're aware of your critiques on social media. Virtually all of your questions are answered in Breaching the Mainstream, particularly in Chapter 4, where we lay out our definitions and our very specific criteria for group inclusion. And they went on to say, I would encourage you to take a look at the entire report as it already addresses your concerns. And so I did take a look at the entire report and specifically what their criteria was for which Facebook groups would mean that a lawmaker was associated with the far right. It reads, the political right can be broadly understood as working to preserve certain traditional features of society and their related institutions. This becomes politically relevant because these traditions tend to be attached to institutionalized hierarchies variably rooted in class, race, and gender. At the very least, conservatives support limiting the use of government and public institutions to address the inequality entrenched in economic and civil society institutions. So they're essentially defining far right as anyone who wants limited government. That's what that paragraph tells me. Because if you want limited government, then you're not interested in dealing with issues related to racism or sexism. Okay, I already know we're off to a bad start here. It has several categories of Facebook groups that it deems problematic. Those categories are COVID denial, Tea Party, constitutionally constructed nationalisms, Second Amendment, far-right paramilitaries, okay, I get that one, constitutional convention advocates, political parties, okay, that's very broad, secessionist, okay, I get that one, school-centered, election-centered, anti-abortion. So being pro-life, again, in their view, makes you a far-right extremist. And then they have another group called Groups on the Christian Right. Another subset is far-right conspiracy, neo-Confederate, anti-Indian, anti-immigrant, Islamophobic, white nationalist. Now, there are some groups in there, white nationalist, these anti-Indian. There's some groups in there that make sense, right? If you belong to a anti-immigrant or anti-Indian Facebook group, that's problematic if you're a lawmaker in the United States of America. But to put groups like that side by side with a group that is, let's say, pro-choice, pro-school choice, or anti-lockdown shows you the inherent flaws in this study. But let's focus in for a moment on COVID denial. Okay, what do they deem a COVID denial Facebook group? According to the report, IREHR divided such groups into 7 major categories: anti-mask, anti-mandate, hoaxer, reopen, anti-vax, multi-dimensional, and anti-lockdown. So again, based on their stated criteria, if you are anti-mask, if you are anti-vaccine mandate, which I think accounts for like almost half of Washingtonians, if you are anti-vaccine, like you just don't want a vaccine, you join a Facebook group in that regard, you might be considered by this Seattle-based organization to be part of the far right, to be a far right extremist. And again, I go back to this organization's own definition of defining the far right. They write, the far right can be understood as groups and individuals advocating changes in the organizational structure of the state or public policies that would significantly undermine political, social, or economic equality along such lines as class, race, gender, sexual orientation, national origin, immigration status, and religion. This can encompass groups and individuals who aim to significantly undermine the capacity of government to address broad issues of public health and safety, workplace safety, environmental protection, and environmental justice, and other critical public goods. Those last two words there, that's important to understand. What this organization deems as critical public goods is going to be much different than what other people might consider a public good. So what this entire report seeks to do is to label people as extremists if they do not fall within this organization's definition of politics for the public good. It has nothing to do with whether the lawmakers are actually right-wing extremists. Now, are there a few on the list who are incredibly problematic? Of course, and I mentioned earlier, if you're part of some like neo-Nazi group, that's kind of a no-brainer. But when you have lawmakers who belong to Facebook groups about reopening the state, Facebook groups about not wanting to wear a mask, Facebook groups about wanting to reopen schools, all of a sudden you're right-wing. You're on a hit list of far-right lawmakers. And that is wrong. So you have an organization that claims it is about fighting extremism, if the extremists are white. Yet they are putting something out there in a heated political climate that could very well inspire extremism on the other end of the spectrum. And for that reason, they should be ashamed of themselves. If you like this video, make sure to become an unDivided subscriber to help us grow this mission to give common sense a comeback. You can do that in two ways, at patreon.com/undivided, or by becoming a contributor on my locals community, brandikruse.locals.com. Thank you to the founding sponsor of unDivided, 1530 Mortgage. Visit them at 1530mortgage.com.